Thanks for coming out for our lecture tonight. We are going to hit another timely topic in the public policy spectrum: international migration and economic development of global metropolitan areas, of which we all live in one, so it's very relevant to us. And our speaker, Neil Ruiz, tonight is going to have a component about looking at Las Vegas and some of the interesting data he's uncovered in his preliminary study of our city and region. A very timely topic, as I mentioned. It'll be interesting to see how the nation and Congress and the administration handle or don't handle immigration this year. I don't know, it's Las Vegas, we might make a wager on what will happen or not, but I have no idea. We'll see if Neil does. And as recently as the State of the Union, it was mentioned, and there's of course the, if you will, the global immigration issue, but then components of it. What Neil's going to talk specifically about, more specifically about H1B visas, and I'll leave him to elaborate on that portion of immigration for you. We're really pleased to have Neil Ruiz join us from Brookings Metropolitan Program, where he's written and researched on this topic at some length, and will be the beneficiary of that. Neil's undergraduate work was at UC Berkeley, and then his graduate work at Oxford and MIT. And he's been hard at work at Brookings, exploring the implications of immigration, particularly in our nation's metropolitan areas. And we'll see how Las Vegas stacks up tonight. Neil? I'll be back to help with questions when Neil's through. And I almost forgot to mention, for those of you who are note takers, we have Neil's PowerPoint up on our Brookings Mountain West website under our lectures, so don't panic if you see a slide disappear before you've got it all down. Neil?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bill and Brookings Mountain West, for hosting me. It's nice to be back here. I was involved actually about a couple of years ago on the Nevada State Economic Development Plan. We did a report in 2011 that actually fed into what Governor Sandoval and the state of Nevada is following, and I'm glad to see how, you know, that the Nevada is actually recovering. And that's what then, but at the same time, what I'm going to talk today about is immigration. And as you know here, if you live here in Las Vegas, immigration is very important to the city, to the metropolitan region. Everybody either here, majority of people here are either migrated from another state, from a rural area, or actually from abroad. And so what I'm going to talk about today is really looking at how does international migration and in relation to economic development of global metropolitan areas like Las Vegas. So the first thing is that a skilled workforce is really essential. That's the key component to any metropolitan area functioning. And what I call here is what we call the Metropolitan Policy Program is the next economy. This is an economy that's not just consumption-based, but one that's more productive, that's innovative, that's globally oriented with exports, foreign direct investment, and also low carbon with more innovative technology and energy use. So we believe that, you know, this leads to a lot more opportunity for the metropolitan region, for the nation as a whole. And today what I'll talk about, here's a little bit of an outline. I'll talk about the demand for foreign skilled workers overall in the nation and how it deals with all the metropolitan areas around the US. Secondly, I'll look at the supply of skilled workers, both US workforce as well as foreign skilled workers. Then I'm going to take a deep dive and really just give you a glimpse of what's going on here in Las Vegas. And then fourthly, I'll talk about the challenges and prospects for immigration reform, what's happening where I'm living now in Washington, D.C., and what are the prospects of why it's so important for reform to happen at the federal level and what it means for you here in Las Vegas. So first, back in July 2012, I did a report with me and my co-authors that looked at the H1B Visa Program, in this report called The Search for Skills. This Brookings report was the very first study that actually took a look at the geographical demand for H1B workers by employers throughout the United States. I was able to find data, and I found it, you know, with the employer metropolitan, kind of the addresses of where the metropolitan, where the employers are located, what are they looking for, what kind of workers are they can't find from the local population, and why are they requesting this non-immigrant H1B visa. And the H1B visa, the reason why I say it's non-immigrant, it's a temporary visa that lasts for 6 years, but it's usually about 3 years, and it could be renewed beyond the 6 years if they're in the queue for applying for a green card, which is a permanent resident card. So the H1B program, what I'm arguing is that it connects the US employers to high-skilled workers. How does it do that? Back in 1990 is the last time that the H1B program kind of had a major overhaul in terms of creating this visa program. And in 1998, there was some little bit of revision. So it's been kind of long overdue since the H1B program has been looked at in terms of reformed. And this is true about most of all of immigration policy in the United States. We really have been living, you hear this term, the system is broken, and it really is broken. It's because we've been working in a system that's been in existence since post-World War II, and it hasn't really reflected the needs of the technological changes that happen and the interconnected world that we live in now. The H1B program is really focused a lot on high-skilled. These are for workers who are, in the science, in the technology, manufacturing, in the computers especially. And so it really provides foreign workers, this is really their avenue of coming to the US through the H1B visa program. But the H1B visa program only allows about 85,000 per year to enter. And that's for the entire nation. And 20,000 of those 85,000 are reserved for advanced degree. Those are master's or above graduates of US universities like UNLV. So that's what the numbers that are currently in place. But around the world, globally, let's just take engineering. Where are all the bachelor's degrees in engineering being produced in the world? 56% are coming from Asia, followed by 17% in Europe, 4% in the US. And we have to remember, US, we are still the leading innovator around the world. Even though China has a lot of manufacturing, India has emerged as an economy, and Mexico is rising as well, and South Africa is rising. The US really, we've always been a very entrepreneurial, very innovative society. And so a lot of people want to come to the US and work here or start up their businesses. So the H1B visa program, as I said, is a temporary visa, and there's 2 types of employers that can apply for this visa. Those are private firms, and they're capped every year at 85,000 if you're a Microsoft, a Bally's Gaming, or you have to apply for under the capped version. Or if you're a research nonprofit government organization like UNLV, you are uncapped. That only represents about 10% of all H1B visas, but UNLV, they don't have to worry about the cap for visas. But the private firms, they do, which is where the large majority of visa requests are from. So here's the current caps. This is we're here, is about 85,000. But back in 1998, the last time they revised, Congress changed anything about the visa program, we were in Silicon Valley. You have to remember in the late 90s was going through a boom. There was a lot of things going on in the dot-com boom. We had a lot of software, hardware, everything was innovating. The economy was doing very, very well in the late 90s. So a lot of employers were complaining to Congress, we can't get enough workers, there's not enough H1Bs. So they went from 65,000 back then and allowed it to go up to 115 in 99 and 2000. And they said there's still need and there's still a higher demand. So they increased it temporarily to 195,000 from 2001 to 2003. But what happened during that time period? The dot-com bubble busted. So it was interesting. So Congress said, well, and they weren't really using, you'll see in the next slides that they weren't really using as much up to 195,000. But then suddenly it went down to 65,000, and then back in 2005 they've added the 20,000 for U.S. graduate, foreign students who graduate from U.S. universities in advanced degrees. And here's a look at who are the employers that are requesting H-1Bs, the most employers? You have it in four main industries. In information technology, the largest companies that are requesting are Microsoft, Intel, and Wipro. Management consulting companies like IBM, Deloitte, Accenture. Manufacturing companies like Caterpillar, Cummins, and Qualcomm in San Diego. You have the finance industry like Ernst & Young, Goldman Sachs, and JP Morgan Chase. So the largest companies are really requesting a lot of H-1B visas. But also I want you to remember that under the H-1B program is also the only avenue for startup companies that are hiring foreigners. Or if you're a foreigner and you happen to start up a company, well, H-1B visa program is usually the only avenue for you to apply for. But that becomes difficult because the US government will look at you and say, wait a minute, how could you be starting up a company and you're the founder and also the employer and you're sponsoring yourself for H-1B. So it gets really difficult for smaller startup companies to actually apply for the H-1B visa program. So what about uncapped institutions, the research nonprofit organizations? The top requesters for H-1B visas are your top universities, your top tier 1 research universities, MIT, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, UT Austin, University of Texas System, California, Michigan, but also the biggest health government research institution, the National Institutes of Health. We wouldn't be having a lot of health workers or health researchers if it wasn't for the H-1B program, because you have a lot of foreigners who have the skills that we're looking for to look at into diseases, into various aspects of the health industry. Where are they coming from? So most H-1B visa recipients are coming from the large majority from 2 countries, actually mostly 1 country, but 2 major countries. India, which is 58%, 8.8% from China, and then you have almost 3% from Canada, South Korea, Philippines, and the United Kingdom. What are they doing? What kind of occupations specifically? You see here that 64% of most of the requests for H-1B visas by employers are for the STEM occupations. These are the science, technology, engineering, and math. 46.8% are for the computer occupations, followed by 8% in engineers. But then you also have the non-STEM occupations. And healthcare practitioners, even though we would think that is STEM, for the study that I did, I had to put it under non-STEM because the US government doesn't consider health practitioners as STEM fields in terms of for visa purposes. But they are the highest, they're pretty high at 6.4% for health practitioners, followed by financial specialists like actuaries and economists in the financial sector, and which also total makes up 36%. This slide kind of looks at trends. In the bottom, I'm still showing the cap for H-1B visas that's set by the government, but here's the number of applications. And it really follows political and economic trends. When the economy is doing well, there's more H-1B visas being requested. When it's doing badly, I mean, we all remember here in Nevada this, because this was the epicenter of the recession. There was less requests, there was a big dip there. But you could see here consistently there's a lot more demand for H-1B visas than the actual visas available. And here's the reason. H-1B visas are given on a first come, first served basis. I mean, this is our immigration system today. So the cap is up here, and here it's done on a first come, first served basis that start on April 1st. So April 1st, or if it's Mondays, if it's the 2nd, it'll start on the 2nd. The doors will open, employers can file their applications for H-1B visas, but once it hits that cap, we're done for the year, and they have to reapply next year. So the blue line, if it's blue, that means it was open for business, allowing applications for H-1B visas. But the red meant that the cap was met. So you see here from April, you see back in 2004, the cap was met pretty quickly. Then it was really met very quickly during when the economy was doing really well. Then the recession was hitting, so it took a lot more months to fill the cap. And then now Last year, so 2 years ago, it took about 10 months. 3 years ago, it was 10 months to fill the H1B visas quota. A year after that, it took 10 weeks. Last year, it took 1 week. And there were so many that they had to do, for the first time, they had to do a lottery system. So can you imagine if you're a business and an employer and you have a person you need to hire, but they happen to be from another country, and the skills that you need, then they have to, and if you're leaving it to a lottery system. So there were about 40,000 H1B visa applications that were denied last year, and they're probably in line now to hire on April 1st to look for a visa for them. So this is the system now. But at the heart of it, even though everything is at the given and distributed at the national level, metropolitan areas are really what drive demand for H1B workers. We have to remember that here, if you think about Las Vegas, you have big companies here. The economy, the dynamics of labor markets are different for each metropolitan area because they have different industries that make up each metro area. So here's a look at my findings. You see here, these are 106 metropolitan areas that I call have a high demand for H1B requests. And what I did here is that these are metropolitan areas that had at least 250 H1B requests between 2010 and 2011. And these 106 metropolitan areas represent 67% of the national workforce, but they represent 91% of all H1B requests. So these are pretty much the high demand H1B metropolitan areas. Here's a look at what are the metropolitan areas with the greatest number of H1B applications from an absolute numbers. No surprise, you see, New York is very big, so of course they're going to have a lot of requests. You see here Silicon Valley, which is San Francisco and San Jose metropolitan area, LA, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, and Seattle, the home of Microsoft. What are the highest metros with the highest intensity? What I mean by intensity here is the number of H1B requests for the metropolitan areas over the number of metropolitan areas workforce. So as a share of the metropolitan workforce. And you see here, some are very similar. Again, Silicon Valley has a lot of H1B requests per the workforce in the region, in the metropolitan area. Seattle. You also see other ones that really pop up. Columbus, Indiana, which I'll talk in a couple of slides. That's the home of Cummins Incorporated. Bloomington, Illinois, State Farm is there. Trenton, New Jersey, that's where Princeton and the pharmaceutical companies are located. You see here Bridgeport, a lot of financial sector right next to New York. So these are the metros with the highest kind of as a share of your workforce that are requesting H1Bs. Then let's look at what are the metropolitan areas with the highest STEM requests. Those are for STEM occupations. And it's actually kind of interesting how it is Silicon Valley, Durham, where Research Triangle Park is where Duke Medical and Duke University, Albany, New York, where you have a lot of tech going on. But then it's at America's heartland. This is where a lot of manufacturing is going on. Columbus, Indiana is there. Peoria, Illinois, the home of Caterpillar. That's a very American engine manufacturer. Davenport, Madison, Wisconsin. Fayetteville, the home of Walmart. They're requesting a lot of H1Bs. And now let me give a deep dive on 3 different types of metropolitan areas: San Jose, Columbus, Indiana, and Rochester, Indiana. So you can see here's a look at San Jose. Between 2010 and 2011, there were 15,000 H1B requests in the San Jose region. This is about 17.1 H1B requests per 1,000 workers in the San Jose area. 3% of them are uncapped, so a lot of them are competing in this national pool of 85,000. And who are the top employers requesting? It's Intel, Apple, eBay, Yahoo. These are gold standard tech companies that we think of and we use every day. The occupations, 87% of the H1B requests in San Jose are for the STEM fields. And the top occupations requested is for computer occupations, for engineers, and business operations specialists. Let's now take a look at Columbus, Indiana. This, when I was doing research, just kind of puzzled me. I was like, what's going on in Columbus, Indiana? And you can see here, it's a lot smaller, but it's about 629 H1B requests, but it's 14.6 H1Bs per 1,000 workers in Columbus, Indiana area. So it's really important to Columbus, Indiana. And only 1% are uncapped, but and you see here, Cummins is by far the biggest requester. And I remember talking and interviewing them a couple of years, and I was asking why, we're in the middle of recession, but you have a lot of requests for foreign skills. Why is that? They told me, well, we can't find the right workers. We need engineers, people who could help us with clean technology. We discovered something that works, and we need to export globally, and everybody has a high demand for a clean engine technology. So they were really thriving, and they still continue to thrive, but they needed the engineers. And when I look at Columbus, Indiana, their unemployment rate for those, even during the heart of recession, for those with bachelor's degrees and above, was about 4%. So they really didn't have a high unemployment rate. So that metropolitan area, again, very different even during the recession. Now let's take a look at Rochester, Minnesota. This is actually also interesting. It's a lot smaller, and you can see here that the majority of the requests are for uncapped institutions. Actually, it's Mayo Clinic. They happen to be considered nonprofit medical, so that's why they're able to get, they're not subject to the cap. But you can see here that majority of them are for the life sciences and health practitioners. And you see here that it's a small amount, but when I was interviewing them, they told me it's very important, and they have a hard time still kind of getting them into the green card process, even though they're able to get their H1Bs. But I'll talk about that in in the last slides today. So for all 106 high demand metropolitan areas, I look at kind of I have metropolitan kind of profiles for each of them. And you can look at them in this website and pull out kind of if you were curious about other regions around the United States. So now let's look at the supply of a skilled workforce. So metros, you need skills to drive the economy. The H1B Visa Program is actually fascinating because the way the designers built it in Congress was the visa fees, when employers pay, they have to pay quite a bit, between $4,000 to $6,000. And parts of that funding goes to training U.S. workforce, the current U.S. workforce. So over the last 10 years, it's not that big, but there's been $1 billion raised over this 10-year period. And it goes to two departments in the federal government, the Employment and Training Administration and the Department of Labor, that gives money for workforce skills training at the local level, and then the National Science Foundation, that gives money for scholarships for graduate training in the STEM fields. So the federal government, what I've found in this paper is that, what we recommended in our recommendation was that they should target skills training in high H1B demand metros. If there's a lot of demand for H1Bs, the way the program was supposed to work is that train the people so that you don't have to rely heavily only on foreign skills. You could train, and the data itself that I presented earlier kind of gives us an indication of what are the industries, what are employers looking for. So what they can do is actually target the training in these high demand occupations in those workforce grants, giving grants in those areas. But it also means that metropolitan leaders need to collaborate with the federal government to apply for these technical skill grants. But when you take a look, and one good example here is in Kansas and Wichita. Wichita kind of experienced a hard time, kind of like Las Vegas, where Boeing left, and there was a lot of unemployed skilled people. So what Kansas Engineering Excellence Project was a collaboration between Wichita State, the local Workforce Alliance, and other commerce and their other research institutions, where they applied for this grant for $5 million to help unemployed people from Boeing get their bachelor's, master's, or PhDs. But what they did there is that they actually helped with employers work with local, the Wichita State University to develop the curriculum so that they could actually train people who are going to be employable in the future that are needed by employers. So the employers actually advised, here are the areas that we need. We need to have more people in some certain areas of aeronautics engineering. But when I looked at the data, I got this data from the Department of Labor, which they didn't really have an evaluation of where it's been distributed. I took a look and I found out that most of the high demand metropolitan areas are not getting their fair share of the H-1B visa grants. The large majority of them are going to low demand H-1B metros. You could see here that technical skill grants, I mean, it's very, Columbus, Indiana, which I talked about, and Bloomington, Indiana, Illinois, which have a high demand for H-1B workers, they haven't gotten anything. San Jose got a small share, New York got a small share. So that's an issue that I made a recommendation to the US government. They're looking into, and they have proposals in Congress to change that. But now let's take a look at metros, at the foreign students who are located in metropolitan areas. The US is the global hub of higher education still. We receive the largest share of all foreign students around the world, which is 21% of all students. The second is the United Kingdom, followed by, I believe, Australia, Germany, France. But any foreigner who wants to study, the US is usually the first destination. And here's a paper I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a glimpse of, but there's a paper I'm going to be releasing at the end of next month looking at foreign students. I have data from the US government where they granted me confidential kind of addresses of all foreign students on an F1 visa that entered into the United States. And there's about 5 million approvals, and I've sifted through it to really kind of understand kind of where the students are coming from, not just at the national level to what metropolitan areas in the United States, but really to help us understand the metropolitan, local connections that could be made and are being made when foreign students come into the United States. There are 3 types of foreign student visas. The first one, which I focus on here, is the F1 visa. This is for full-time academic study. It's the most common visa. Second is the J1 visa. This is more for full cultural exchange, the Fulbright program, where you have exchanges and which is a requirement that they return back to their countries of origin for at least a couple of years. And then the M1 visa, which is the most least used, but it's more for vocational training. But I focus on F1 visa because right now in Congress, on the table, is to allow this visa to have a dual intent, which means to allow employers to get a green card for employees so they could skip the entire H1B visa process. So where are most foreign students coming from? You see here the large majority of growth from 1950 all the way to 2012. You see a huge growth coming from Asia. We have about 64% currently of all current F1 visas are coming from Asia. And the top countries are China at 25%, India at 15%, and South Korea. Where are they landing here in the United States? What metropolitan regions? And you can't really see this map that well, but what you see here, here's the incoming bachelor's degrees and above of foreign students per 100 students. The same way, the number of students in the metropolitan area, I divided that by the number of incoming foreign students divided by the total students in that metropolitan region. And you can see here that certain metropolitan regions actually pop up really high, like Jonesboro, Arkansas State University, which is the home of there. Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, as well as University of North Alabama. So this kind of gives us a glimpse of how smaller metros have a kind of a high concentration of foreign students. But you still do have the large metropolitan areas like New York and the Bay Area and Boston, of course, that have a lot of foreign students that are entering. So what are they studying? You see that students from Asia are overwhelmingly studying in the STEM fields. You see here, in India, 71.5% of all Indians studying in the United States are studying in the STEM field. And you see here China, it's a smaller share, but you have a lot more students from China, but only 36% are studying in the STEM fields. South Korea, about 20%. But you could really see here that Asia is really driving the population of STEM students in the United States. And when I release this report in end of next month, I will also have profiles of all the metropolitan regions. That's going to show you where are the students, how many students are coming. This is over the last 5 years. What are they studying? What percent of the region is coming from STEM? How much money is coming in to the region from foreign students? Where are they going to, as well as where are they coming from specifically? What cities and what countries? And I won't want to dive in too much on Las Vegas. I have a slide just focused on Las Vegas coming up. So now let's look at Las Vegas, the demand and supply for foreign skills. So back in 2011, as I said earlier, me and a team back at Brookings, we worked on this economic development plan here in Nevada. And we worked with SRI International to really help figure out what are the industries to diversify the economy. We know that we got really hurt here in Las Vegas with the housing crisis, reliance on consumption, on gaming. When the whole nation was hurting in recession, of course, that really fell apart. So we made these recommendations on how to diversify the economy. In Southern Nevada, we recommended that the South focus on these 5 industries, which is still tourism and gaming. It's very important to the region. Business and IT ecosystems, health and medical services, clean energy, logistics and operations. We did a lot of quantitative analysis as well as interviews with a lot of stakeholders and found that there's a lot of assets in these areas that can grow. For instance, in tourism, you are the global hub for gaming, and when there's online gaming, you guys will be the state competing with New Jersey, but Las Vegas, Nevada, you'll be the global leaders in this. You are the global leaders already. Business IT ecosystems, you have a lot of interesting things with cloud computing. You have Switch located here with Rob Roy, and you have a really good base for business services and specialized data centers here. Health and medical services, I now know that we recommended that you have the medical school here. You guys are having a medical school that's eventually going to be coming here. But you already had a cluster already here in Southern Nevada. Clean energy was another thing that we recommended, as well as logistics and operations with your wonderful airport that's been expanded here. So here's a look in Las Vegas for H1B visas. In 2010 and 2011, there were 780 requests, about 1 per 1,000 workers in the metropolitan area. 7% were from uncapped institution, which is largely coming from UNLV. But there's a large number coming from Bally's, and that makes sense because slot machines, all the technologies behind it. It's not as simple as people think, and it requires a lot of computer technologies. You can see here, 48%, almost 50% of the requests for H1Bs here in Las Vegas metropolitan area are for the STEM fields, especially in computer occupations, health practitioners. As I said, you already had a cluster and a lot of need for skills, and it's showing up here with H1B visa requests for health, engineers, and business operations specialists. Now when we're looking at the money that Las Vegas has received for the skill grants from the H1B visa fees, well, as I showed you earlier, Las Vegas is considered a high demand H1B visa metropolitan area, but it really only received a very small share of that. In terms of per capita terms, and it was only a one-time $400,000 grant. So there is room here, and I think that the Las Vegas region, your local economic development organization, should apply to the ETA and the NSF for more funding for your skills training here in the area. Let's look at your foreign students. In Las Vegas, you had, this is over the 5 years, from 2008 to 2012, you had almost 3,000 foreign students that came in, which is about 15.4 students per 1,000 students in the metropolitan area. The top schools of destination, UNLV is by far the clear leader, but you also see Rosamond University of Health Sciences. This again, there's already a cluster. Foreign students are already seeing there is a need or that there's good training here already, and Touro University in Nevada. But in terms of foreign students, only about 12.1% are studying for STEM. Overwhelmingly, they're studying in business management, and it makes sense. You have the hospitality management located here in UNLV, which is world class, but most of the students are really business, and followed by engineering, health professions, and computer operation, information sciences. And where are they from? The number one hometown of foreign students in Las Vegas is Seoul, Korea, followed by Singapore, which makes sense because UNLV has a center in Singapore and also the gaming industry there, Hong Kong, Beijing, and Busan. So what are my recommendations, or what do I see in sum about Las Vegas? First, you have a high demand for STEM H1B workers, about 50% of all requests. So there is a need, there's a shortage here for STEM workers, and there's a lot of demand from employers for foreign skills in the STEM fields. Secondly, foreign students, unfortunately, maybe it has to also do with the institutions of the higher learning here. There's not enough of STEM programs, so a lot of foreign students are not going into the STEM fields. So you only have about 12% of foreign students studying in the STEM fields here in Las Vegas. A large majority are 66% of those studying bachelor's degrees and above are studying for a business degree. And Las Vegas is currently, through the students, are connected intimately with Seoul, Singapore, Hong Kong. If you think about it, when you're a foreign student, you're landing into the United States for the first time, this is going to be your new home. This is what they consider their home in the United States. So this is a potential for the Las Vegas region and also other metropolitan areas to understand their composition, because you could actually leverage these students for connections when they're trying to globalize their export or trade. They have the language skills, they have already the probably work experience or connections back in their hometowns abroad. And lastly, Las Vegas should apply for H1B visa fees funded through workforce training grants. So what are the challenges and prospects for reform? Here's the current visa system, as I said earlier. If you're a foreign student and an F1 visa, you usually can apply for an extension, which is called optional practical training. It will allow 12 months to about 29 months if you're a STEM graduate of a US university. But then you have to apply for an H1B if an employer is willing to sponsor you. That will give you another 6 years maybe. And then they usually have to apply for a permanent resident card, which is a green card. So if you're a foreign student, there's so many loopholes and so many obstacles to actually stay here permanently. This is our current visa system. And if you happen to be Indian or Chinese, Indians have to wait from the point of H1B to green card. Once they sponsor, it takes about 10 years. For Chinese, from the point of H1B to green card, about 6 years. This has to do because our current immigration system has a quota system that there can be no more than 7% of all green cards for any given country. But as we know, India and China are huge countries. It doesn't make sense. And if you saw the numbers in terms of the high-skilled migrants who are coming here to the US, they're mostly from India and China. So that's why we have this major backlog, and it's very difficult for Indian and Chinese to stay and work in the US, even though they're the most highly skilled. And here's a data that I was able to FOIA, that's Freedom of Information Act I got through the US government. They granted to me, and I found in 2010, we saw that in 2010, there are about 668 foreign students that entered into the United States. But at that same year, only 26,000 of F1s transferred to an H1B visa. So there's a problem here of retaining. So if you're a foreign student, there's really not a lot of opportunity to really stay. Again, you have to go through all those loopholes to stay into the United States and work. But the good news is that Congress, whether you're Republican or Democrat, they agree on high-skilled migrants, on foreign students, as well as on H1B. They've agreed on increasing the cap. They've agreed on some of the recommendations they had in the report to let it fluctuate to the economic needs of metropolitan areas, or that take into that account, as well as allowing foreign students to actually apply straight to green cards if the employer is sponsoring them. So that's what's on the table now, and there's a potential for it. There's an opening right now in Congress for something to happen this year, and I think that would be the most ambitious legislation that could possibly pass this year in Congress. Then you have another proposal. We might see this soon. This is Governor Snyder of Michigan. Michigan also, like Las Vegas, suffered a lot through the recession with the automobile industry. And they're having a lot of skill shortages, especially for the STEM fields. And he's actually requesting, why don't we have a pilot program where you give more H1Bs or green cards actually set aside, conditional green cards, if someone lives and works in Michigan or lives and works in another Midwest area, because they have a higher need, lower unemployment rates. So that's especially for in the highly skilled areas. So that's kind of something that may be coming up and unfolding over the months, especially when they discuss it in the House and in the Senate. Well, that's my presentation. I'm glad to take a lot of questions here, discussion.
Thanks. We have a few minutes, and I'm hoping, anybody like to start? Yes, sir.
So I really enjoyed your talk and presentation, and one of your last slides pointed out that the hurdles the foreign student should overcome from switching from F1 to H1B and eventually maybe green card to be a permanent resident. That there's a big backlog, of course, depending on which country you're coming from. But one thing that we should not overlook as well is a reverse brain drain trend since late 80s, or I think it basically started after the dot-com bubble burst in early 1990s. Because those folks, mainly in IT industry, from China or India, their IT industry in their home countries is rapidly growing, and they need high-skilled workers. They even match some of those salaries they can earn from United States. And I know those type of the policies to retain those highly skilled foreign workers in the United States, yes, that will help some and that will partially solve the problem. But there is a bigger trend. Those students or the highly skilled workers tend to go back to their home country more recently.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you didn't mention anything about that trend.
Yeah, I didn't mention that here, but yes, there is a trend. You do see, India and China also really emerged as big, powerful players in the global economy. And India in particular is very interesting because the IT industry is very competitive. This is a competitive advantage for India. So if we're kicking them out here or giving them a hard time, there's also an opportunity for them to build themselves back in their home countries. But one thing that I always hear a lot, especially from employers and also from Silicon Valley and Durham and everywhere else, is that there's still we have a lot more R&D still going on in the United States. So there's been studies where they do the R&D Silicon Valley, but a lot of Taiwanese help manufacture the silicon chips in Hsinchu Tech Park in Taiwan. So the manufacturing side, and now maybe more R&D is moving to Asia. But right now, especially a lot of these H1B requests, they're really for the highly, highly skilled. A lot of them are for work in R&D. Microsoft is a global company, which is actually interesting. You just had the appointment of a brand new CEO who was a former foreign student twice, who was from India originally, in Hyderabad, India, Nadella. He's now the new CEO of Microsoft. And what's interesting is that Microsoft is a global company. They have operations all throughout the world. And I asked them, why do they need the H1Bs here? They could just put them somewhere else around the world. But they said, well, it's because we need them for R&D. And R&D is still located in the United States because we have Stanford located there, Berkeley. We have the top institutions here. And that's where you want innovation to happen, not in India or China. And there's also intellectual property issues where China and India won't protect your IP. So that's why.
Potential problem related to the policy reform to make it a lot easier to attain, to get through all these hurdles. For instance, like those folks in IT or STEM industry, yes, they finally get the green card, and it means as long as they come back to the United States once a year, they can maintain it. So the folks working at Microsoft or Apple, they can be hired by other big electronic companies like Samsung or LG or some other companies in China. And they are free to go anywhere with this skill set. And once they go back to their home country or some other Asian emerging economies, if they want, they can find another job in the United States later on. So ironically, those kind of policy reform might work in the reverse direction.
I think that's a good point.
Retain those high-skilled workers. That's something that we should also consider.
I think you're right. It is a very fast, technology is very fast moving, especially in the high-tech area. So you're right, it could be, but again, at the same time, there's pressure for people to be mobile between nations. And currently the system is making it difficult to actually move. So yeah. Right.
Somebody else, I saw a hand, yes, sir.
How long do you anticipate it may take Congress to act on raising the cap, and to what level might they raise the cap?
So there is a small window this year, and I think it's from April to summer. The Senate, you have to remember, they've already went through the comprehensive immigration reform bill, which has a lot of the H-1B reform already in it. They would double it, raising it from 85,000 to almost about 180,000, I believe. So I think that is kind of what's there. And in the House, actually, they've already passed a bill through committee that actually is very similar to the Senate. So if they don't pass anything else, they have already agreement on high-skilled immigration. But the hardest part that they have to deal with is the undocumented and the really harder issues. So that's the thing that will be interesting to watch if that falls apart, or if they just only do one piece or several pieces.
Sir?
When employers apply for an H-1B, is the name of the foreign employee attached, or can the foreign employee, sort of go to whoever happened to get the H-1B visa?
So it's interesting. You asked a very good question, because there's 3 government agencies that deal with the H-1B program. You apply without a name to the Department of Labor to get it certified that they're not taking away a job from American. They have to go through that process to get it certified for that specific occupation. Then it goes to the USCIS in Department of Homeland Security, which that's where the name is there. They have to actually put the name there. But I didn't get that data. And then you go through this Department of State. Of course, they have all the name there because they have to check if they're legitimate, as well as interview them. So those are kind of the 3 areas. The name is not in the first part, but it's all in the last 2 parts.
So can the same person be applied for by multiple employers?
Yes.
And then get the job with, so that even if the total number of requests isn't granted, the total number of would-be foreign workers might fall under the cap.
I mean, you bring a good question. I mean, you're right. I mean, the way the system works, our current system doesn't have a barcode for those 3 agencies. Just to let you know, it would be simple if they had a barcoding system so that they could actually trace that one request for one person from all 3. But you're right. They could be requested by multiple employers if they got 5 different offers and 5 different requests.
And each of those would count as one.
It could count as one, yeah. You're right.
In the back there, sir?
Is there any way to determine the economic cost of the denial of the H-1B for, let's say, graduate students that are forced out of the country? We educate them.
Yeah.
They're forced out, and then there's the opportunity loss cost of not having them work in the United States. I see that in the programs I'm in here, everybody has to leave.
Yeah, that is a very, very big issue. I mean, when it comes to universities, I mean, it is, international students usually pay especially more in terms of tuition. So you could say, well, that's fine, they could leave. But at the same time, it's still resources and it's still a spot. Especially if you're working in the STEM fields, they're working with innovative ideas, they're working in something cool and innovative that could be groundbreaking in many cases. But then if they're forced to leave, then they can't continue that work. So they have to either go somewhere else, and Canada is welcoming everybody. There's a lot of countries that are actually just marketing based on our problems. Canada says, come, you have a bachelor's degree or above, we'll let you in. Even if you don't have a job, they'll let you in.
If there are any university colleagues here, please feel free to correct me, but you get in this cycle of foreign students like out-of-state students. There's a financial incentive for a university to accept them because they pay higher tuition and fees, and they in effect subsidize your state students. But as you said, they then leave, so they don't generate that long-term benefit to the nation. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's one, some people would say that, especially you saw like Arkansas State University and a lot of state universities, because they've been cut a lot of funds, they wanted to market to foreign students. I mean, University of Michigan, even out-of-state students, they've been leading in terms of just charging an exorbitant amount of money for out-of-state students and foreign students so they could raise a lot of capital. But still the issue is about retainment, which is huge, because if they're already here and they have these connections and assets and they're studying certain things, they could be great if they were staying here to fuel your economy already here.
Well, I think it related to Bill's points.
I just want to get a couple in the front
Kind of
here.
answered my question, and when you showed all the universities there and the number of visas, I can understand why, most of them are on the East Coast, and you look at the pattern going across the country, but I was really surprised with Arkansas, Alabama, Iowa, and I was wondering what, because that obviously doesn't really go at the gradation with population centers.
Yeah.
But why are they so popular?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I did talk to some of the universities down in the middle of the country, and they, yes, they're trying to attract foreign students, especially for tuition. That's kind of a lot, But there are also kind of partnerships. I know that I think I think Arkansas State has a partnership with Mexico for training in aeronautics. With I think Mexico's sending some scholarships.
And would that
Students
kind of
there.
relate to that high demand and low demand discrepancy, or the funding aspect of it, where it seemed like the higher demand cities were getting less of the per capita funding?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I did see some of that. I mean, it is interesting in terms of the funding that there's a lot of, in the middle of the country that were getting more funding as well versus the bigger cities, but that, yeah.
Sir?
I'm curious if, along with your research on this, you did any type of parallel research into the number of undocumented students who are living here and came here without F1 visas, who are studying in the STEM fields, and what those kind of figures would match up against the students who came with visas.
I wish I could do that study, but there's no data. That's the hardest. I mean, that could be done if someone was going to do a survey, and people, with techniques and really understand if they're willing to actually volunteer the information, because I would imagine it would be scary for undocumented people to tell the truth about data, but that would be great. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of students who are in that situation.
Do we have a last question? Oh, sir.
I was just going to ask a little bit more about that inequity there, that 1529 number that you put up there. Is there some more statements you could make about maybe where that money is going?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that, the Workforce Training Administration, ETA and Department of Labor, when I interviewed them and talking to them, they said they cannot, the way the law is written right now, it really is about local leaders applying, the workforce development agencies really applying for these grants. So then there's also incentive to kind of diversify geographically. But I told them, well, why don't you do it for the high demand H1B areas? Because that makes sense. These are the occupations. Well, they told me admittedly saying, yes, we wish we could do that, but by law, what was written in Congress, this is how it's done. But there was an interesting tweak that happened this year that I was involved with helping them, and they wanted to see if they could use the fund to fund STEM education. This was part of President Obama's kind of, from last year's State of the Union, he wanted more STEM education in high school. So there's a thing called Youth Connect, and I believe that there's some Las Vegas people, agencies that actually applied for it. But that is going to actually give fund from the H1B program for the first time for high school. But if you look at the Senate and the House, the current recommendation, the current program, that they want to actually raise the fees and actually put it into actually STEM education for states, because the education is really controlled by states. So the ideal situation is that a new fund would be created, which they've agreed on both House and Senate, it's already in both of them. And that fund would actually be given to states that could apply for them. Because the capacity at the local level is really difficult. Sometimes you're going to have this really showing, that distribution also show that some areas are probably better at, have the capacity to apply for these grants. Because metropolitan leaders, they have to apply for these. So, and if you don't have capacity or don't even know about it, like in Columbus, Indiana, then they're missing their share. So that's what's going on.
As a technical clarifying point, could you tell me, some of this is rolled up in the workforce reauthorization language in both the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
Are other pieces that you're talking about, are those in other bills then, or is it all part of?
Yeah, that's part of that's in the Senate's comprehensive immigration reform bill. So that would be, it would still keep this funding, but it would actually increase more. So they would probably have, I think, from what I saw, instead of you saw $1 billion over 10 years, it would actually give $5 billion per year. So it would be a lot more, which actually you could do a lot more for that. And we have to remember, we had sequestration. There's not a lot of funds going around. Visa fees is kind of a way that you could actually raise that funding.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation and your time. Thank you all for joining us and for your questions. We have another lecture coming up next week. We'll switch nights of the week. It's next Thursday. And for those of you who've been coming to our lectures, we'll have Carol Graham back from Brookings taking a look at the impact of information technology at a societal level. She's got some really interesting insights from around the world. So I hope you can join us next Thursday night. And thanks again.